Hello and welcome back to Streaming Media Connect 2024. I am Steve Nathans Kelly, Editor-in-Chief of Streaming Media and Chair of Streaming Media Connect. And this is our session on content delivery and last mile first. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. So we will be giving away a $50 gift card to Amazon at the end of the session. And the first person to guess the artist and the track that you just heard will win that, but you must be present at the end of the session to win. And if you attend 2 or more sessions this week, you'll be entered to win an OBSBot Tail Air 2 4K PTZ camera. And the winner will be notified by email after the event. Thanks to OBSBot for that. Also, our next big event coming up in New York City is Streaming Media NYC. That's May 20th to 22nd in New York City. And once I get done with this intro, I'll put a link to it in the chat. Registration is open. And speaking of the chat, put your comments to each other and to everyone in the chat and questions for our panelists in the Q&A. We'll take questions toward the end of the session. And sessions from all 4 days this week are actually already appearing on YouTube, and I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. And so, yeah, without further ado, I'm going to throw it to Mark de Jong, who is going to be having Mark de Jong from the CDN Alliance. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, good to see you, Steve.
Yeah, and Mark's going to be having a fireside chat with Subhrendu Sarkar from Warner Brothers Discovery. So without further ado, take it away.
Thanks, Steve. Well, good to see you all. I'm going to have a session with Subhrendu Sarkar from Warner Brothers Discovery. Focus here is on, as we know, they use CDNs and multi-CDN, but how can they go beyond the possibility of multi-CDN to deliver real quality delivery globally, using, for instance, edge capabilities to overcome last mile challenges. So I would like to introduce to you Subhrendu. Subhrendu, are you on?
Yes. Yeah, I'm here.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Welcome. Could you give a small introduction about Warner Brothers Discovery?
Sure.
As well as what you exactly do and responsible for within Warner Brothers.
Yeah, so Warner Brothers Discovery is probably well known for people who watch any movies. So we have studios, we have lots of things, like we have TNT Sports, we have linear channels, we have DTC products like Max, Discovery Plus, Eurosports, and many others. I specifically more work on the DTC side. So on all the streaming platform, or I'm primarily responsible for the playback platform. So the playback journey, whenever anyone watches anything on basically Max or Discovery Plus, that playback journey is what we look after and are responsible for the playback user experience to a certain extent, how the bytes are delivered, what kind of manifests are delivered, what kind of streams a user is expected to get, what kind of streams they play back, what the session looks like, what the playback session looks like. So all of that is what my day-to-day job is about.
Just my understanding, if you look at, I mean, you have different brands that you do live, you do linear, you do vlog, you do fast. I mean, you do all the ones. Is there a big difference in approaches if you look at from a content delivery perspective between VOD, fast, linear, live? Are those all different workflows, or are there lots of stuff that you do from a CDN perspective again?
Yeah, so from the CDN perspective, there isn't, like, the last mile is not different as such in terms of how we deliver between the different kinds of products, as you mentioned, between live or fast or VOD. At least right now we don't. Sorry. Also, because we primarily do HLS and DAS deliveries, we have At least till now, we haven't tried anything else for live specifically. For example, we haven't tried any other protocols yet. But those probably is something for the future. But in that perspective, the last mile is pretty same for all those products. The difference comes in just prior to the last mile is where significant differences come, where we determine what the stream would look like. And so that's where it's dynamic. So based on the product, based on the user, also based on where the user is, we do a lot of determination before the last mile is handed off to the CDN.
Okay, cool. You're using multi-CDN, obviously. You can't rely on a single one; that would be too dangerous. Can you tell a bit about how you do your multi-CDN, what type of switching you do, how granular you do, and also what do you do specifically in terms of getting higher quality and more performant content delivery using multi-CDN globally?
Yeah. So yeah, we do have multiple CDNs in all over the world. Right now, we are in 3 markets primarily: US, LATAM, and EMEA, or Europe. I mean, we are also in APAC, or basically some of our products are in APAC. But what I mentioned was like the main, the volume of the products, so to speak, like Discovery Plus and Max is probably where most of the traffic that we get from are. Their primary markets are those 3. And we do have multiple CDNs in each of those regions. Each one of those regions have different configurations of those multiple CDNs. Also, that is based on, I think there are 2 main driving factors towards how we allocate the volume to each CDN. I think the first primary one is our contract and our pricing that we get from each CDN. That determines that is the primary driver for determining the high level volume that we allocate to each CDN. Second is what kind of CDN performance, how many pops, what's the CDN presence is in that region, so to speak. So we may choose one CDN partner in US, but a different CDN partner for LATAM, for example. Or let's say we have 4 or 5 CDN partners, not all of the 4 or 5 will be the same in every region. There will be some differences depending on which region it is. So, so that primarily determines the how we differentiate between the CDNs, and how we do, like how we switch between CDNs. As I said, like the first primary driver is the allocation. So we drive it through, we have an internal service / system which basically host the higher level CDN configurations or the allocation based on which we allocate the traffic and switch between the CDNs. That system also has the ability to switch between CDNs based on like whether you do a manual override. If you find like if an operator or DevOps finds like a certain region is having a issue with a particular CDN, they can do manual overrides. We also are in the process of looking into how to make that manual override more automatic, so to speak. And in that process, like looking at different ways to enable that. We are not fully automatic right now yet, but it is in the process of, we're looking into that.
Okay. And if you look at the switching part, is that chunk based? Is that session based? Can you tell anything about that?
Yeah, so right now it's primarily session based. So we switch at a session level. as I was mentioning, that the most benefit we think that we'll get when we move to switching CDNs just based on like today, when we have a manual override and a more session based, and the biggest driver being the volume, the automatic switching based on the quality or the performance of a CDN in every region doesn't come into being. It's not automatic. So it does come into being based on we finding out or observing the performance of CDN in each region and then making subtle tweaks to that configuration. As we go into more dynamic CDN switching, that's when we want to enable midstream switching as well, or mid-session switching as well. The biggest benefit I think we envision is most of the time, so coming to the benefits or why maybe this is something we are even looking into, I think at a higher level, outages on CDNs are not very common. Like it's not that it's happening every day or every week. Probably every CDN will probably have an outage once a year at max or something like that. So it's not that you need to constantly switch CDNs all the time. So at a high level, that works well. The only challenge comes is we find all the time that like CDNs will have like micro problems in micro ASNs or micro regions. So those are the aspects where we feel that we could prevent a lot of like playback failures or rebuffering if we are more proactive in switching the CDN. Now, of course, the biggest benefit is playback failures. So there are three major metrics we probably track. I mean, there are many others, but the three topmost are video playback failure, video startup time, and rebuffering. Now, video playback failures can happen at the playback session start, or it can happen midstream. And video startup time is only at the startup of a video generally. So the playback failure case is more addressed at the session level and the video startup time as well. The rebuffering and playback failures midstream is something we can address, or those metrics can be improved if we go into a good midstream switching solution, so to speak.
Thanks. If you look at this, you mentioned EMEA, US, and LATAM as the main regions where you focus on. So if you look at the different countries, especially, I mean, if you look at Europe alone, we have what, 49 countries just in Europe alone. Do you see a lot of differences between the regions and or countries in terms of performance, in terms of issues with last mile? And how do you cope with that? Are there specific challenges that you need to tweak for a specific country or a specific region that you would not have with other ones? So it's not like a generic solution that you can have for multi-CDN.
So I think the generic solution, so I think the main challenge is that CDNs are the when we incorporate a CDN comes in as a black box to us. What is internal within the CDN is not necessarily visible to us or to an OTT platform like us, right? So within a CDN, there may be there are many POPs. Every CDN has many POPs. So how the performance within those POPs happen is something we don't get visibility into. In terms of like whether we can switch between POP A versus POP B of the same CDN, we don't have that choice today. We can only choose to like do not go to CDN A, start going to CDN B if you are having if there is some performance problems of CDNA in a particular region or country, as you said, right? So in that context, the challenge is primarily that we do all the times have see this micro performance dips of CDNA in a specific region, and it will come back and be fine after like half an hour or something. But that is probably more about some specific pops within that CDN having that challenge, and then the CDN itself is probably able to divert the traffic to other pops to mitigate against that. And but as a OTT platform, we can't really wait for that as well to a certain extent. So we'll probably take preemptive action to divert traffic out of the CDN in between. So those are kind of the challenges we have in terms of like not getting visibility of the performance within the CDN when things don't perform as well as they should be.
I mean, CDNs are known for being black boxes, and we all know this. I mean, the term is very related, unfortunately. If you look at CDNs, would that be more? I mean, I'm sure a lot of CDNs will not want this or give the capability, but there is a little bit more, let's say, openness. What we feel is happening with CDNs to be a little bit more willing to give some more information than they used to. Do you see that kind of feedback as well from CDNs from your point of view as being a kind of provider?
Yeah, I've started hearing some kind of openness lately. I mean, it was much less. It used to be complete black box few years back. Now I think things are slightly changing depending on who the vendor is or who the CDN service provider is, what kind of both product they want to bring to the market as well as what kind of features. But I think CDN service providers are starting to get the understanding that the performance dips or performance differences between their within internal CDNs, which is also based probably very heavily onto the load and capacity within their CDN of the different POPs. So getting some visibility of that exposed of what kind of load a particular POP is experiencing will be helpful. Having said that, I think doing it piecemeal has like piecemeal as in what I mean by that is if only one CDN does it, yes, it brings some value to someone like us, but the real value really comes in when if it is like if all the CDNs does it and it is based on a common protocol or common standard rather than everyone having its own both feature set interfaces to basically talk with that interface, right? So those are the challenges as we explore that territory going forward.
Yeah, I mean, capacity, I mean, if you look at big events, I mean, it's known that, hey, you have either reserved capacity that you go for, and then you have the reserve with that particular CDN, but they will not give you an API and say, hey, we have capacity here, and here, you can choose which one you want, etc. So unfortunately, that's certainly still not the case, but that will be your
that is
hope.
like
at some
that
point
is
that would be okay, cool. Now let's zoom in on the last mile a little bit more. I mean, CDNs by default basically have three options on how to deliver traffic. Either to do this with connections, so through peering, transit, PNIs, etc. PNIs and peering. Other one is they use third-party networks to get into ISP networks, especially tier 2s, tier 3s, tier 4s. Or they have an agreement that they have certain caches within the ISP network or in or very close to the ISP network. That's basically the options that currently CDNs have, and etc. And that's basically how that's the determination of how you deliver the traffic towards the end users as a starting point towards the end user, covering the last mile. Now, there are all kinds of new capabilities now. There's a gazillion actually now.
Mhm.
There are operators that have their own CDN, wholesale CDNs. I always call them so wholesale CDNs. They have their own CDN. You could upload directly onto their CDN that they will then deliver to the end users.
Mhm.
We have capabilities of multicast ABR, especially for live, which is an upcoming capability.
Mhm.
There is capabilities of potentially for some operators to leverage their MECs and their MAC infrastructures or their own internal edge capabilities that they offer. You have specific edge players now that are getting into the market that deliver specifically on specific edge locations typically within ISP networks, but from a very edgy, very deep edge capabilities. You have P2P mechanisms now as well. There have been a couple of them. By the way, there's a new trend of new ones coming up. So there are all kinds of different capabilities, etc. Plus, then you have the kind of providers. You guys rely on third-party CDNs, but there are a number of different kind of providers. The biggest one is being Netflix, but the Zone does it. Sky does it, etc. Some other ones that basically build their own infrastructure, so build their own CDNs for delivery, and then have their own infrastructure connectivity with the ISP. So there are a gazillion of additional options. What are your thoughts on using any or more of those as a mix in general for kind of providers in general, not specifically for one of others, but in general, how is that perceived? That, hey, we have a gazillion different options. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, so let me first probably paint the background or the history. Like, so a content provider like us, or a DTC OTT platform, will historically have a CDN-based delivery system in place. So we have an end-to-end playback experience where CDN is a very critical piece in that, right? Because it does the last mile delivery. So I'm setting the context because however we want to explore all these new capabilities, we need to always keep in mind that we have an end-to-end platform live in production. Millions of users are constantly using it. You cannot potentially break that system or break a playback experience from the end user perspective, right? So we always need to make sure that whatever capabilities we add is seamless and has zero impact on the user or end user watching something. Having said that, so that's the like the foundation pillar that we cannot break. And then but having said that, we and probably every OTT platform will always look for all the capabilities out there in the market to see where we can improve. So there are two main things we always will look for. One is cost for delivery or cost for delivering the X number of bytes or petabytes of data that we deliver. Can we reduce the cost, both so that we can give better value to the end user and for profitability and other reasons. And the second is performance. So performance has many factors, as I was previously mentioning, rebuffering, metrics like rebuffering, VST, VPF, metrics like those is one aspect of the performance. Another aspect of the performance, when you look at live streaming, for example, then performance at scale, when you have millions of users, how do you also like really not impact those metrics, as well as for live specifically, how do you reduce end-to-end latency, so to speak, like glass-to-glass latency. So those are the factors which will determine, like with those things in mind, is how we look into each one of those capabilities to see which one of those capabilities we can leverage to bring value. Now, in terms of like, you mentioned a lot of like different kinds of evolution of the players in the market in the CDN business, right? So the the biggest, so I'll start off from the other end. So the things that are harder to explore right away or immediately is something which needs end-to-end overhaul or end-to-end change across the ecosystem. So I'll just say it aloud, like things like multicast, right? So we currently do not do multicast. Yes, it is a very attractive proposition, and we probably will look into it, but it is not an easy change to incorporate into an existing system in prod, right? So we have to look at things that will bring value to the platform uh, incrementally, as well as look into those game-changing things, which will be more experimental in the beginning and will gradually make it to production in the longer run. Now, so having said that, I think all those other things, like whether it is we get capacity from like within other ISPs, whether it is another CDN vendor who is collaborating with ISPs, or it is us collaborating with ISPs, or it is, as I previously mentioned, like CDN service providers exposing capacity information within their CDNs itself. All those things are very, very interesting for us because all those things are not totally overhauling most of our systems. And depending on how, like, any service provider or any vendor or any partner who can make it as little change to our ecosystem will find it will find we find it much more easier for us to try that out, find out how beneficial that is, and hence incorporate it. So I mean, we're always open towards like improving the system based on those criteria, so to speak.
Good. I mean, what I hear is you don't want to have an operational nightmare. That's basically what I hear.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely the foundational piece, right? We begin there, that you cannot, like, you have a live system which is streaming live sports daily, which is streaming like major shows, major like House of the Dragons and anything which has like high volume. You cannot have a operational significant operational change which both is the teams within Honor Brothers is not needing to relearn everything in one day, so to speak. So you have to take things gradually for all those game-changing things, which will take much longer to incorporate. But things that are more seamless to incorporate is probably much more easier to experiment with and find out its benefit.
So let's dive in one of those more specifically, which is open caching. For the ones not familiar with open caching, it's a developed by the SVTA, the Streaming Video Technology Alliance, and it's a mechanism for being able to distribute content from CDN to up CDN to a down CDN. So for just a regular CDN service provider towards a upgraded CDN, but in a generic standardized way, right? I mean, this is OpenCast has been around for a while, 7-8 years now. There's a more discussion about open caching now in the market in general. And there are players like, for instance, Quilt that offer that overlay CDN where they have already embedded their systems in ISP networks. So they have the ISPs themselves have their own CDNs based on Quilt, and Quilt basically is an overlay CDN. Hey, in all those ISPs that are using my system, I can offer you an overlay CDN. You only have to come with me, and I'll arrange delivery to those ISPs directly on top of their CDN. Generally speaking, if you look at open caching and from a high level content provider vision, I mean, it's known that Disney, for instance, has been using it. What's your take on this in terms of open caching? Is this feasible? Is this a long run?
So I don't think it is quite feasible, especially from a platform perspective. I think it provides another option for a content provider like us to have another mechanism to deliver the bytes, or another way of delivering the bytes. And to a large extent, I think open caching is very helpful, as long si- as long as the open in the open caching word is really adhered to long term.
Mhm.
Right, so isn't, I think right now, so for example, you mentioned Quilt, and without going into specifics with how Warner Brothers Discovery is looking into open caching or Quilt, uh, in general, like if Quilt is doing open caching and providing that overlay CDN, and if it is only Quilt which is doing it, then for a content provider like us, we will use, if we are to use Quilt, Quilt is just another CDN for us. Whereas the game changing aspect comes only when open caching is now used by, say, another vendor or another provider which is also using open caching. Then I think things start to change, because then you can mix and match between those players, and then a content provider can really start using some benefits of the open caching. But other than that, if it is just one company which is using open caching and we end up using that, we'll end up using it as another CDN provider.
Yeah, exactly. It just has an open spec, basically.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
basically it. Good point. Good point. If you look at, I mean, open caching is really about open caching, so that's the caching way, and it's basically how content is typically delivered right now. But we also know, and we've had talks about this earlier in other sessions, edge compute is on the rise. Everybody knows this. Every CDN is looking into it. There are specific edge players there. We can call it edge. You can call it distributed cloud. It just depends on how you name and frame. But it is expected that edge is going to be more embedded also in content delivery, in content adaptation, capabilities and getting data back that you can use on the edge side, instead of going completely back to the core and process everything there. What kind of capabilities do you see in terms of edge capabilities with CDN, and how does that affect eventually last mile? Because if it's a closed environment like a CDN, right, and you have edge capabilities there, you have the cache capability, you have the edge compute capability in there. That's fine if it's one single player, but then if you have multiple ones, or if you use, again, specs like open caching or other capabilities, that all of a sudden is not there anymore. So how do you see that in the future, in the scenarios that are happening that you already know of, without probably revealing what kind of scenarios you're looking at? Where do you see the trend going in that area from a provider perspective?
Yes, I think it is natural to probably think about edge computing and like link it to CDNs as such, because CDNs already have a lot of infrastructure on the edges. So it is probably natural to think that that's where the edge computing would come from. Now, whether like that doesn't just limit it to the CDNs, other players can also come in and build their own edge computing platforms, irrespective. From the CDN perspective, or the edge computing currently being provided, or the solutions out there, one of the challenges, as you mentioned, is the diversity in the platforms that are getting provided, as like what kind of interfaces, if I want to use that edge computing platform, what kind of interfaces I have exposed to me to deploy specific systems or services in those edge computes, whether it's what programming language it is, what kind of tech stack it uses. It becomes difficult if like 5 CDN providers or let's say 5 edge compute providers have 5 different technologies to use. And then as a content provider, and then if I have to use an edge compute, then either I choose one of them and write the software for what I want to do for only that CDN. But if I have to write 5 different ones, then it is challenging. Like it takes a lot of effort. It just reminds me of like the same challenge we have today at the player level, right? So you have like iOS, Android, and 20 other CTV players, which we have to deal with. We do deal with that because that is absolutely our end customer, right?
Mhm.
But when it comes to the edge computing platform, I think it is a harder sell because it is not the edge end consumer who is going to benefit out of it. So that's where both a common or a simplified common interface is needed. I say interface, which includes like what tech stack it is, what kind of deploy procedures we have, things like that. I mean, just for example, I won't be willing to write, say, AWS Lambda, either in Python or in JavaScript, and also write something else in, say, Varnish and something else in C++, like in different ways, or doing the same thing in different ways, right? So that's one part of it in terms of what the tech stack is. The second part, what a CDN can probably provide is CDN already gets a lot of data from the end users or end devices because it gets direct calls to those uh, from them for the delivery of the bytes. So that's another area where a common standard would help in terms of whether it's CMCD or something else, but more like how do you look at those data points at the so if I have to write my own edge compute solution for a specific edge compute platform, I would also want that the data that I'll be operating on is to be uniform and standardized. So that's the second part. So one is the tech stack needs to be same, probably. I said should be same. I mean, ideally, it's ideal world, as much as it can be, if they are similar in the 4 5 CDNs. And the second part is the data that we operate on is same or similar. There's some control as a content provider we can have in terms of we can control some amount of what the data looks like that will process on those CDNs. But then there are others which are, if there are like CDN logs or CDN specific metrics that the CDN is emitting that we would want to use, then those are something that we probably better to get standardized.
If I look at then if you then this back to the multi-CDN model, right? So I mean, multi-CDN has been used for, I don't know, more than a decade now, I think,
Yeah.
roughly.
Mm-hmm.
I think most cloud providers have it under control now. There are different solutions. If you have, I mean, all the bigger ones do it themselves, right? So that this is known. Everybody does this because they want to have full control about the stack and how they want to steer traffic and all kinds of things. And even origins are being built for providers themselves. If you then gradually look now at the edge compute capabilities in that regard, basically, we're at the beginning of the multi-CDN part, but then on the edge.
Yeah.
That's basically where we are now. So
yeah,
probably gonna take another 10 years before we feel confident. But
yeah, that's, I mean, that's the thing I wanted to hear from you as well in terms of how, so looking back, if I look at like how the multi-CDN began, as you said, probably a decade back, but I think initially it was each CDN was still, now it is an accepted fact, but back then it was still each CDN competing for getting its share. Right, so competing against another CDN in a lot of ways. And now I think every CDN service provider accepts, but also they're still competing, but they still accept that other
understand
CDNs
that.
are in the play.
Yeah.
But how does those learnings from the past decade can and should like open up opportunities in the edge computing platform in the coming years?
I think it's not so much a technology driver, but to me, in my opinion, it's more a business driver, right? So if you make it more easy to use edge compute across different CDN providers instead of focusing on one, you have more availability, you have more capabilities as a kind of provider. You probably would be more willing to use it because you're not depending on a single one, for instance, or you need to do a lot of work to have multiple ones. Which then flows back to those CDNs and say, okay, hey, I can bring you a lot more business as a content provider because now all of a sudden I can use edge compute much easier, much better, much cheaper from an operation standpoint without less risk. It gets more, it brings more business towards the CDNs themselves. So in my opinion, it's not so much a technology driver as such, but it's more business driver. But I think it's like the chicken egg issue.
Yeah.
Who starts first?
Yeah.
The content provider is going to start first because they need to have 2 or 3 or 4 different players, and they're just going to build something because they need it to get what they want, and that's how multi-CDN started in the first place. Or is it driven from the industry and from the CDN industry? And hey, can we do something that would actually generate more business, and we can make it easier for people to use it, so we get more money out of it, and then basically give the capability to content providers and say, hey, now it's much easier. Now just bring us the business.
Yeah.
Or the last option, which I think would be the most preferred one, collaborate and see how together, hey, I can give you business. We see these and these and these and these and these and these scenarios where we can use your edge compute.
Yeah.
This is this and this and this. So if you could fix that, we can do this. And then you have business. But that means collaboration, not just on the technology level, because again, technology is one of them, but also from a business perspective.
I really hope that the collaboration thing like comes out forefront, because I think the unlocking of the business is like, okay, you can unlock the whole edge computing for all the content providers if you solve some of these problems, but which can only probably get solved by collaboration. That way you unlock the whole potential of edge compute, and then you have a lot more business coming into probably all CDN providers, so to speak, right? And but unless you unlock that, it becomes like you are close the gates, and then you're still like content providers can't get into the gate.
Yes. So I think the answer in this case then would be collaboration. And again, it's business and technology. I think that have to go together in this case. You can look at it separately, but I think there's a lot of business drivers behind it that would make it easier for technology changes to happen, like sort of standardization or some sort of at least normalization on certain aspects that will make it easier for you, and then again would bring business back to CDNs. Hey, now we can sell much more edge compute because it's much more easy to use.
Yeah,
that would be one of this. Not a question. I think the last one. You had a question. I know you asked me earlier. In terms of a lot of them are related to CDNs.
Yeah, I wanted to also check from the, like, since you chaired the CDN Alliance, and last year had been a crazy year with all AI and LLMs. And so what kind of how does CDN Alliance is either talking about it, what ways are CDNs looking at it, what kind of opportunities does that open up either for the CDNs or content providers as such?
I mean, there are a lot of developments going on if you look at the CDNs, right? I mean, edge compute is a generic term, right? But you see capabilities now with CDNs from GPU, VPU, DPU, so data processing specifically, IPU is a new one, which is pre-infrastructure functions as part of what they offer. So there are all kinds of new developments ongoing, also within CDNs itself, where, yes, sure, caching and content delivery is still very traffic related, but there is a lot more processing happening. There's a lot more machine learning. There's a lot of AI coming, which eventually will be used for content providers. I mean, what OpenAI just launched with their video creation that they can do now based on AI. I mean, this is just the beginning. So imagine that needs to be happening on scale. So how you do this? You do this by running that on the edge, using, for instance, yes, you can't all centralize it and then try to. It's impossible. So there are quite some capabilities in that area, but that requires compute. So next to delivery, yes, there's going to be a lot of compute-related stuff using GPU, VPU, DPU, IPU, as well. So those are things that are currently happening in the space, and CDNs are reinventing themselves. I mean, some, unfortunately, if you look at last year, some said it's enough. We stop. New CDNs are jumping in. We already saw that happening as well. And yes, I think this new generation of types of CDNs, yes, delivery is still important, but compute is also coming. But it needs to be distributed.
I mean, I feel like the whole centralized, it is like we go back and
go back to edge. It's basically the cycle that we do again, right? So when we had the super pops, which is very common, big pops with lots of connectivity, and now we slowly go back to much more edge capabilities, and probably in 5 to 10 years, we're probably going to reverse back, having certain functions going back to centralized functions. I think that's natural way of how things. Perfect. Last question. Well, actually, two. Next 5 years, from a content provider perspective, looking at current multi-CDN, how do you see that? And if you look at your end, AI, machine learning, large language models, etc., how do you think that would be impacting or be used by CDNs from your point of view in this?
So I mean, both part of it is me being optimistic and hopeful and hope this happens in the next 5 years, and part of it is already happening, but we'll see how things evolve.
How fast it goes? Yes,
how fast it goes. So I think definitely edge compute is one area where, as a content provider, we will always be super interested in, because it gets a lot of value proposition in terms of getting specific applications run in a more decentralized way or distributed way. Things like if we're running personalization of streams, whether it's like today, the simplest personalization is probably ad insertion. So just taking that as an example, today, if we are able to run it in a very distributed fashion, then it reduces load on the centralized infrastructure. You can do a lot more personalized, performant things on the edge. But personalization goes way beyond just ads. You can do a lot more personalization as products evolve. As a content provider, you can, once the personalization ecosystem is unlocked, where you can, today it is very locked because personalization is very expensive, it's very centralized, and it is not, it is sensitive to performance. So all those aspects, if edge compute or something like that unlocks, then I think the application layer can unlock itself in terms of finding new kinds of personalized experiences to be provided as a content provider. We can explore new kinds of applications, new kind of content to be personalized. So that's something that will potentially can impact directly what content we provide to our customers, how personalized that is. The second level, other things that can really be beneficial to run anything on the edges are things like whether it is log processing or data processing that we can really improve upon our metrics at a more distributed scale. If we are things like if we are doing security is another aspect where I think edge computing can come and help a lot, because security is on our, for example, today on any video streams, we use DRM. But security, if you want to enforce security, security is also something that you need to enforce at a at a at a much higher scale, because that's when you can prevent the piracy. You can prevent someone to sneak into within a playback session and steal a stream or restream a stream and things like that. Keeping it centralized means that you are very reliant on performance, and you are bottlenecked by performance, and then basically there is a business like pro and con that comes in, where people will always think like, is security more important or the end user experience is more important? And at times you will probably lean more towards end user experience than on the security. But having the ability to running performance on the edges will make it possible for the applications to be much more secure, because then you can secure them very personalized. You can also detect piracy and other like frauds at a much more granular scale, and take action as well. You can take action more automatically. You can employ like AI and ML models in a distributed scale. One of the biggest challenges of AI and ML is performance, right? Like how much data you are processing, what kind of memory and CPU or GPU you are going to use. And the more centralized it is, the more like more non-real time it is, as well as more less performant it is. So making it distributed would probably unlock a lot of those, where you can make things performant, make things more real time. You can enable something to be detected in real time. You can enable something like CDN switching in real time. All those things are enabled by getting into the applications run in more distributed fashion. So that's the main thing. I am hopeful and eager to see how the edge computing platforms evolve. My only like hopeful hope is that I'm pretty sure the edge compute platforms will evolve and will come and bring all of this to the front in terms of providing those features to the content provider. My biggest hope is that while we do that, we learn from our past decade of the multi-CDN experience, and we evolve the edge compute platform in a collaborative way, so that we start off with more standardized interfaces, so that it becomes easier for content providers, and like it unlocks the applications much faster, and we don't go through the pain that we went through the last decade and more.
Good. Thank you. So I have a couple of questions that we got from the audience. So we have a few minutes. So let's make sure we answer the questions crisp and quickly, so you can go through a few at least. I have one from Clay Lambert. It says here, does edge compute actually make economical sense for you? It appears to have a very high OpEx cost for things like transcoding.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, as I said in the beginning, right, anything that we look into, we start on looking into through the lens of OpEx first, like how easy it is to get this feature or capability into our ecosystem. And OpEx is two pieces. One is the raw cost of operations, as well as what is the cost of incorporating or adding something to the end-to-end platform. How much cost does it, what is the cost of maintenance of that? What is the cost of operations of that? What is the cost of development of that, right? So all of that is very, very critical. yes, for example, if you take the example of transcoding, yes, I think transcoding on the edge is, especially at high scale, I think it is probably very highly cost ineffective at this current stage, uh, till cost really becomes like transcoding is cheap, but it is not today. I mean, that's equivalent to when I said like transcoding, it is equivalent to running ML models on the edge, kind of, because that is also very cost ineffective at this moment, uh, because of the high demands on the GPU and so forth. So that's where we'll need to look into terms of like what we'll always look into the cost benefit and what user experience and whether the application really can over like bear the cost, for example.
Either you save cost somewhere else because
Yeah.
you do something on the edge. So
Yeah.
I think it's a balance, right? So
Yeah.
or you have added value that is relevant for you that would make it worthwhile.
Yeah,
do it.
exactly.
The concept, but you're going to be a lot more. I mean, for CDN, it's relatively easy to calculate terms of business cases.
Yeah.
I think for edge compute is going to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
You're going to do a lot more Excel sheets figuring out, hey, is this going to make sense? Yes or no?
Yeah, exactly. So I think I completely agree with you. Like, as a business case, it has to either unlock a new business, for example, which will like bear the cost of this edge compute, or you can do this edge compute, but will recoup that cost by not doing it elsewhere. Now, how we'll always look into possibilities, but right now, specifically for transcoding, you are right that it probably doesn't make sense to do transcoding on the edge in the current products that we have as content providers.
Edge compute might go a lot cheaper over the end.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, this is Clay Lambert. I do know one CDN, I'm not going to say which one, is looking into providing free transcoding. So those things are already happening. I'm not sure if it's in the edge, I can tell you, but there are things happening in that space. I'll give you one last question and then I think we have to go because Steve is already waiting. So a very short answer on this one. Would you be willing to use a specific purpose CDN at edge locations such as on airplanes if it were provided to you at no cost for you?
I think the short answer is we are always open towards finding new possibilities, but we always look at it from the lens of OpEx, right? So in terms of what is the cost that will incur in terms of operational maintenance, operational development, integration, all of that, and then bear like what is the potential it unlocks, both in terms of value and the business value of that. If those make sense, then it will happen. If that has significant benefit, then it will definitely happen. If it has not significant benefit, then I think it will move much more slowly in that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Then we'll leave it like this. So, Subhrendu, thank you very much for
Thank you.
the session. Very lovely. And I'll give it back to Steve.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. Thanks, Subhrendu. It's been a great conversation. I think it's really valuable to get the content providers, perspective on edge delivery and how it's all likely to evolve and shake out in the next few years. Yeah, so this has been great. Just a little business before we go. So the walk-on music was Art Blakey and his Jazz Messengers, Are You Real? And we stumped the audience this time. Nobody named it. I think we had one attendee who won one earlier who refrained from shouting out. But I'm just going to go ahead and give the Amazon gift card to the first attendee who asked a question, which was Ruben Calzadilla. So congratulations, Ruben. And so that's it for this one, and we will see you in a half hour for 5G ATSC 3.0 streaming and the future of broadcast media. Thanks again, Mark and Subhrendu.
Thank you.